The clock on the wall ticked louder than it ever had before. Each second felt like it wanted to scream. I stood there, clutching a cardboard box against my chest, my palms trembling, my knuckles white from the pressure. My desk, my chair, my years. All packed inside that one small, pathetic box. And across from me, standing like a queen in her castle, was Veronica Hale. My boss, my tormentor, the woman who'd turned this once beautiful company into a place where kindness went to die. Her lipstick was perfect, her tone was poison. 10 minutes, she said, glancing at her gold watch. That's how long you have to clear your things before I have security escort you out. Her voice echoed through the open-plan office, sharp and cold as glass. I looked around. Faces buried in screens, phones, keyboards. Not one person looked up. Not one dared. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights, the faint clicking of a printer somewhere in the back, the wheeze of the old air conditioner. And my heartbeat, thudding so loud it almost drowned them all. Do you understand me? She added, that smirk curling like smoke. 10 minutes. Her words hung in the air like the final nails in a coffin. I swallowed, forcing my voice not to break. I understand, I said quietly. I bent down, picked up my framed photo. My husband and I on the day we bought our first house 27 years ago. The glass was cracked, but I slipped it into the box anyway. Then came the mug, world's best employee, faded from years of coffee stains and dishwasher cycles. I smiled faintly as I placed it on top. A tiny, almost invisible smile, the kind that hides a storm. Veronica tilted her head. Oh, don't look so tragic, she said. You'll be fine. Maybe you can find something, part-time. Clerical work, perhaps. Something more, your speed. Her laughter sliced through me like winter wind. A few desks away, I saw one of the younger accountants, a kid I'd trained myself, stifle a chuckle. My stomach twisted, but I kept my face still. You know, she went on, stepping closer so that only I could hear. The thing about people like you is that you never realize when your time is up. You get comfortable. You start thinking you matter. She smiled wider. You don't. For a moment, I felt the heat rise behind my eyes. That sting of injustice, humiliation, disbelief. But it passed. Like a tide pulling back before it hits harder. I looked her straight in the eye and said softly, "You're right, Veronica. Everything has its time." She blinked. That wasn't the reaction she expected. "And everything," I added, taking a slow breath, "leaves a trace." Her smirk faltered for just a second. Just long enough for me to see the confusion flicker behind her eyes. Then she laughed, dismissing it, waving a manicured hand as if swatting away a fly. "Security will see you out," she said, and turned her back. I stood there for a long moment, staring at her silhouette framed against the glass office windows, the city skyline glittering behind her like a kingdom of arrogance. Then I lifted my box, tucked one last pen into my pocket, and started walking toward the elevator. Every step echoed louder than the last. Each one sounded like the past 25 years saying goodbye. When I reached the glass doors, I paused. The entire floor was pretending not to notice, pretending not to breathe. But I could feel their eyes. I turned not to them but to the office itself. The desks I'd cleaned after hours, the late nights, the laughter that used to fill these walls before greed swallowed it all. "Goodbye," I whispered and pressed the elevator button. The metallic doors slid open with a soft ding. I stepped inside and turned to face the room one last time. Veronica stood with her arms crossed, satisfied, victorious. I smiled, not warmly but knowingly. As the doors closed, I said quietly, just loud enough for her to hear through the fading gap, "See you soon." The doors sealed shut. The hum of the elevator filled the silence. When I reached the lobby, the guard at the desk avoided my eyes. "Sorry, Mrs. Carter," he mumbled. "Don't be," I said. "You're not the one who should be sorry." Outside, the city air hit me like a slap, crisp, cold, and full of noise. I set the box down on a bench and looked up at the sky. It was that dull gray just before rain, The kind that makes everything feel heavier. For a moment I wanted to scream. Cry. To ask the universe why people like Veronica rise while people like me get crushed under their heels. But I didn't. Instead I sat down, took a deep breath, and let the silence settle around me like armor. The box sat beside me. Years of my life reduced to cardboard and clutter. I reached inside, pulled out the old office badge with my name printed beneath the company logo. The edges were worn smooth from years of use. I turned it in my hand, staring at the photo. Younger me, proud, hopeful, ready to work hard and earn respect. That girl had built this place. And now they'd thrown her out like garbage. I ran my thumb across the faded barcode, then whispered, "You still have work to do." A small smile crept across my face. Not bitter, not broken, just quiet, deliberate. I put the badge back into the box, picked it up and walked home. The wind tugged at my coat. The city roared around me. Cars, people, noise. But all I could hear was her voice echoing in my head. 10 minutes. 10 minutes to erase a lifetime. 10 minutes to humiliate me in front of everyone I'd mentored. 10 minutes to think she'd won. As I walked down the long, rain-damp street toward my apartment, I started counting the seconds in my head. 10 minutes. 600 seconds. That's all she gave me. And she had no idea what I could do with 600 seconds of focus. When I reached my door, I didn't even bother to take off my coat. I set the box on the kitchen counter, opened my laptop and watched the screen flicker to life. The reflection that stared back at me was older, harder, the kind of face that has been underestimated too many times. Fine. Let them underestimate me one more time. I opened the old external drive, the one labeled 1998 to 2018/admin archives. The one no one knew still existed. Inside were years of backup reports, emails, and transaction files. A digital memory of the company before Veronica came in and corrupted it from within. I scrolled through hundreds of folders, my hands steady, my pulse slow. There it was. Quarterly compliance. Internal only. When I clicked it, a cascade of documents appeared. Spreadsheets, signed memos, bank statements. Each one a small piece of a much bigger picture. I leaned back in my chair and whispered to myself, "You want a report, Veronica? I'll give you one." The city lights shimmered outside my window, and for the first time that day I smiled. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. You know, when I look back on it now, it's strange how betrayal never arrives all at once. It doesn't storm through the door shouting, "I'm here." Whoa. Creeps in. Low. Dressed up as small changes and polite smiles. That company used to be my second home. It wasn't fancy when I joined, just a small accounting firm tucked between a laundromat and a diner on 8th Street. We had 6 people, 1 printer, and coffee that tasted like burnt mud. But we had something better, we had heart. I started there in 1989. Back then, I was a nervous 23-year-old with a second-hand suit and a diploma I'd earned from night classes. They didn't expect much from me, but I gave them everything. I'd come in early, leave late, and take extra work home because I wanted to matter. And somehow, I did. By 1995, I was managing payroll. By 2005, I was head of accounts. I'd been there longer than the furniture, longer than the computers. When new employees joined, I was the one who taught them where everything was. How to fix the jammed copier, how to talk to Mr. Lewis when he was in one of his moods, how to survive month-end without losing your sanity. We weren't just co-workers. We were family. But families, I've learned, don't always stay the same. Sometimes new people arrive, and everything changes. I still remember the first day she walked in. Veronica Hale. Perfect hair, perfect teeth, and a confidence that filled every inch of the office before she even spoke. She wore a white coat, heels that clicked like a metronome, and that expensive perfume that lingers long after the person leaves. She was hired as the new regional director, young, ambitious, and visionary, as the board called her. Everyone was dazzled. Everyone but me. There was something about her smile that didn't reach her eyes. Something sharp hidden behind the gloss. She was charming at first, brought in croissants, remembered birthdays, complimented everyone's clothes. I'll admit, even I thought maybe she'll be good for us. We'd been running on fumes for years, and she had ideas. Big ones. But soon those ideas stopped sounding like improvements and started sounding like takeovers. She began cutting corners. Small ones at first. "Do we really need to double-check every vendor invoice?" she'd say with that little laugh. "It's all internal anyway." Then she'd adjust expense reports to make numbers look cleaner. Then she'd tell clients half-truths to land contracts faster. And when I'd gently raise a concern, she'd pat my hand and say, "Oh, Margaret, you're old school. That's why we love you. But this is the new era." I should have seen it then, the way her eyes darted when she said it. But I didn't want to believe it. You spend decades building something, and it's hard to admit that someone might destroy it right under your nose. It got worse with time. Within a year, 3 of the old staff members were gone. "Restructured," she said. By the end of year 2, the Christmas parties stopped. By year 3, she'd taken over completely. And me. Stayed. Because I couldn't imagine leaving. She needed me too, though. She knew it. I was the one who knew where every file was buried, who had the passwords to the old system, who understood every client inside out. And when people like her need people like me, they don't say, "Thank you." They pretend we're invisible until we become inconvenient. The turning point came last spring. It was a Monday morning, the kind that already feels cursed before you've had coffee. I came in early as always, and there was Veronica, already in her glass office, pacing, phone to her ear. She looked up when she saw me, didn't smile, just stared. That was the first time I felt it, that cold distance, like she'd already decided something. By noon HR called me in. They smiled too much, spoke too slowly. "Margaret," they said, "we're restructuring some positions. It's not personal." Not personal. After 34 years, it's not personal. They said they'd give me a transition period. 2 weeks. 2 weeks to train the person replacing me. Niece, 25. Fresh out of college. That's when it hit me. All those months, all those kind smiles, she'd been pushing me out, one quiet shove at a time. That night I stayed late in the office. Everyone was gone. The city lights glowed outside, and I sat there staring at the computer screen, my hands still, my heart heavy. Then I started opening folders, years of them. Payroll logs, audit reports, internal memos. And there it was. The pattern I'd half suspected but never dared to confirm. Inflated budgets. Duplicate vendor accounts. Funds rerouted to shell companies with names just close enough to real clients to look legitimate. She wasn't just dishonest, she was laundering money. And the kicker. Every file had my digital signature attached. She'd been using my credentials. When I realized it, my body went cold. My throat closed. My hands began to shake so hard I nearly dropped the mouse. If this ever went public, I would be the one blamed. The old lady who couldn't keep up with modern systems. I stared at the screen for a long time, the monitor glowing in the dark office. My photo on those signatures. Name. And then I whispered to myself. She thinks I'm finished. I didn't sleep that night. Didn't even try. I went home, made a pot of tea I didn't drink, and just sat by the window, listening to the rain tapping the glass. I kept seeing her smirk, hearing her voice. 10 minutes. But something inside me had already started to shift. The sadness was still there, yes. The humiliation too. But beneath it, something else was growing. Something steady, quiet, certain. By morning I'd made my decision. If she wanted me gone, fine. But I wouldn't leave quietly. For days I collected everything I could. Every document, every email chain, every digital footprint she thought was erased. I built a file so large it crashed my old laptop twice. Then on my last night there, when the office was dark and silent, I stayed one final time. I looked around, memorizing everything. The smell of old coffee, the hum of the air vents, the faint reflection of city lights on the glass walls. I whispered, "Goodbye," and clicked Save All. That's when I named it. Veronica's report, final PDF. 534 pages long. Every lie, every forged number, every name she'd dragged into her game. When she told me, "You have 10 minutes to get out," she didn't realize I'd already been preparing for 3 weeks. When she shouted, "You have 10 minutes to get out," I didn't flinch. She wanted me to panic, to cry, to beg, to make a scene she could later mock behind closed doors. But I didn't give her that. I just looked at her. Then I smiled. Because at that moment, I knew something she didn't. Something that would change everything. I turned slowly, picked up my mug, the one that said "World's Most Patient Accountant," and walked out of her office without a word. The whole room was silent, eyes darting from her to me, unsure which one of us they should pity. I didn't even take the elevator. I walked down all 5 flights of stairs, each step steady, deliberate, like I was walking away not from a job, but from a lifetime of being underestimated. Outside, the sky was gray, the kind of gray that feels heavy with unshed rain. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the cool air, feeling the wind brush against my face. And then I whispered, 10 minutes. Let's see what I can do in 10 days. That night, my small apartment felt emptier than usual. The ticking clock, the faint hum of the refrigerator, every sound echoed. I sat at the kitchen table with my old laptop open, surrounded by folders, flash drives, and notes written in my neat, looping handwriting. I didn't have access to the company servers anymore. She'd made sure of that. But I had backups. 30 years of habit made me cautious. I always saved copies. Invoices, logs, reports, even emails I thought might one day matter. And now they did. I started from the beginning. Every time I uncovered another inconsistency, another fake vendor, another consulting fee that didn't exist, I added it to the master file. Count numbers. No assumptions, just evidence. It became my ritual. Every morning I'd wake up at 6, make tea, and work until midnight. The file grew thicker. My resolve grew sharper. Anger became focus. Pain became precision. But I wasn't reckless. Revenge, I realized, only works when it's dressed in professionalism. So I went about it methodically. First, I reached out to a few trusted old colleagues. People who had quietly left over the years but had seen what she was capable of. I didn't tell them everything, not yet. I just asked questions. And soon stories began to surface. The missing bonuses, the contracts lost right before renewal, the sudden firings. It wasn't just me she'd trampled over. She'd left a trail of broken people behind her. Then I did something even she wouldn't expect. I met with her predecessor, Mr. Lewis. He'd retired years ago, living quietly in a small coastal town now. When I called him, his voice trembled with surprise. "Margaret, I thought you'd be running the place by now." We met at a diner halfway between our cities. He looked older, friendlier, but when I told him what had happened and what I'd found, his eyes darkened. He leaned closer and said quietly, "Veronica always wanted control. She used to say the company was wasting potential with ethics. But I never imagined she'd go this far." He slid a small flash drive across the table. "I kept a few backups before I left," he said. "Something about her never sat right with me. When I got home and opened that drive, it was like finding the missing pieces of a puzzle I'd been building blind. Documents that matched the ones I had. Old financial reports that proved the fraud started years before she claimed. Now, the report wasn't just 534 pages of speculation. It was a timeline of corruption. Still, evidence alone doesn't bring justice. You need to know where to take it. And that's when I called in a favor. My late husband, Harold, had a cousin, a quiet man named Dennis, who worked in compliance at a major corporate auditing firm. We hadn't spoken in years. But when I called and explained, he didn't hesitate. "Send me what you have," he said. "I'll handle it discreetly." For 2 days I waited. Barely slept, barely ate. Then came the call. "Margaret," he said, "this isn't just internal fraud. Some of those shell companies tie into federal contracts. You might be looking at a full-scale investigation." I felt the breath leave my body. Not fear, relief. He advised me to package everything formally. Clean, indexed, time-stamped. He said if I wanted to protect myself, I should be the first to submit it to the authorities, not the last. So that's exactly what I did. I spent another week polishing the report. Every section labeled. Every document linked. And when it was ready, I printed a single hard copy, placed it neatly in a leather binder, and sealed it with a gold clip. On the front page I typed just one line. An internal review. Financial misconduct under the supervision of Veronica Hale. Compiled by Margaret Avery. Now here's where the irony begins. On the morning she told me to get out, she thought I'd disappear quietly. But what she didn't know was that I'd already booked a meeting with the board for the following week. It was on the calendar before she fired me. A quarterly audit presentation. She must have forgotten. So I showed up. Not in my office clothes, not carrying a company badge, but with that single binder under my arm. The receptionist froze when she saw me. "Mrs. Avery," Ms. Hale said. "I know what she said," I interrupted gently. "But this is an internal compliance presentation. I'm just here to deliver it." The boardroom door opened, and there she was. Veronica. Smiling like a cat that had already eaten. "Margaret," she said mock-sweet, "what are you doing here? You no longer work." I placed the binder on the long mahogany table and looked her dead in the eyes. "I know," I said softly. "That's why this is my last contribution." She frowned. The board members, 6 of them, gray suits and tired faces, looked curious. "Before I left," I continued, "I prepared a detailed report of recent financial irregularities. I thought it might be useful for the internal audit." Then I turned, gave a small polite smile and walked out, just as calm as the day she'd fired me. By the next morning, all hell broke loose. I woke to 12 missed calls. 4 from unknown numbers. 2 from her personal line. When I finally checked the newsfeed, my breath caught. There it was, headline after headline. Regional Finance Director under investigation for embezzlement and fraud. They'd raided the office. Every file, every computer seized. Her face, the one she guarded so carefully, plastered across every financial blog and local station. I didn't smile right away. Not because I wasn't happy, but because I felt peaceful. After all these years of being too soft, too quiet, too loyal, I'd finally used those exact traits as my strength. Patience, diligence, silence. The things she mocked became the tools that ended her. Few days later I got a call. It was one of the board members, a kind man named Mr. Yates, who'd always treated me with respect. "Mrs. Avery," he said, "I don't know how to thank you. That report saved this company." He paused. "We've reviewed everything. We know what she did. We also know what she tried to pin on you." My throat tightened. "I didn't want anyone hurt," I said. "I just wanted the truth to matter again." He chuckled softly. "Well, it does now. And if you're open to it, we'd like you to come back. In an advisory role." I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "Thank you, Mr. Yates. But I think I've done enough building for one lifetime." That evening I took a long walk by the river. The air was warm, the sunset painting gold streaks across the water. I thought about all the years I'd spent behind that desk, counting other people's money while my own time slipped by unnoticed. And for the first time in decades I felt light. Free. When I got home I brewed a cup of tea, sat by the window and opened my laptop one last time. On the desktop the file still sat there. Veronica. I dragged it to the trash. Clicked delete. Then I whispered, "Goodbye, Veronica." The next morning, as I was watering the plants on my balcony, my neighbor waved a newspaper at me. "Margaret, did you see this?" she said. And there it was, front page. "Whistleblower exposes corporate fraud. Source remains anonymous." Anonymous. Just the way I wanted it. Because the best revenge isn't glory. It's peace. And mine was finally quiet. Morning sunlight always finds its way through the blinds, even when the world outside is about to change. I woke early that day before the alarm, before the birds even started their songs. There was a stillness in the air. That heavy, charged stillness that comes right before a storm breaks. I remember making my tea, chamomile with just a touch of honey, and setting it beside my window. The world looked ordinary. The same street, the same sky, the same soft hum of traffic far away. But I knew it wasn't ordinary. I knew as I sat there with that quiet cup, that somewhere across town, the life of the woman who'd called me worthless was about to collapse. I turned on the little radio in my kitchen. Habit more than anything. Usually it played old songs or morning chatter. But that day, the broadcaster's voice came through, low and sharp. Breaking news this morning. Corporate investigators accompanied by federal officers executed a search warrant at Hale Financial Group. Froze. My hand tightened on the counter. The investigation follows allegations of large-scale embezzlement and tax fraud. Sources suggest the company's regional director, Ms. Veronica Hale, is currently being questioned. I didn't move for a long time. Not out of shock, but because the sound of those words carried weight. Every syllable felt like justice exhaling after holding its breath for too long. Then I smiled, not wide, not smug, just a small, quiet curve of peace. Across town, while I sat by my window, sipping my tea, Veronica Hale's morning began very differently. Neighbors later said they saw the flashing lights first. A pair of black sedans and 2 marked police SUVs parked neatly in front of her house. Not rushed, not loud, just methodical. That's how justice works when it's earned. Not with chaos, but with calm precision. The officers stepped out, jackets crisp, badges catching the sun. One of them knocked once. Firm, measured. Inside, Veronica was in her robe, hair still damp from the shower. She was probably halfway through her first coffee, rehearsing her statement for the board, planning how to spin this as a misunderstanding. When the knock came, she didn't even rush. She probably thought it was a delivery. Then came the second knock. Louder. Followed by a clear voice. Ms. Hale, this is the Department of Financial Investigation. We have a warrant. The color drained from her face. One of the neighbors said she stood frozen at the door for almost 10 seconds before opening it. Like she still believed if she didn't move, it would all go away. But the officers didn't wait for her fear to settle. They walked right in, calm, professional, armed not with weapons, but with documents. And that's the thing about paper, it doesn't lie. Meanwhile, back in my apartment, I had my little radio playing low as I started baking muffins. I always bake when I'm nervous. It keeps my hands busy while my heart catches up. Blueberry this time. Harold used to love those. Each time I turned the page on my newspaper, the story grew. Her accounts frozen. Her devices seized. The board issuing a formal statement. The company cooperating fully. But what caught my attention most wasn't any of that. It was one small line buried halfway down the article. According to preliminary reports, the internal audit that triggered the investigation was compiled by an anonymous former employee. Anonymous. That word, it wrapped around me like a warm blanket. No spotlight, no fame, just truth. By noon the phone calls started again. First an unknown number. Then another. Then one I recognized, her assistant. I didn't answer. But I did listen to the voicemails. The first was rushed. Panic in her voice. Mrs. Avery, please call me back. They're saying there's a report, and your name might be. The second one came a few hours later. Quieter, colder. Margaret, I don't know what you think you've done. But this isn't over. But it had been over the moment she told me I had 10 minutes to get out. That evening I went for a walk around the block. The city felt different that day. Lighter. Even the sunset seemed to linger a bit longer, as if the sky itself wanted to watch. As I passed the small cafe near the corner, I caught sight of the news on the television through the window. Veronica being escorted out of her office building, sunglasses on, head lowered, reporters shouting questions she didn't answer. For a moment I stopped. Not to gloat, but to remember. I remembered every time I stayed late to fix her mistakes. Every meeting where she took credit for my work. Every time she called me too sentimental, too soft, too slow. And I realized, she had never once seen the woman standing behind those spreadsheets. She thought silence meant weakness. But silence, true silence, is just focus in disguise. When I got home, I opened my old photo album, the one Harold and I had built together in our early years. Between the yellowing pages, I found a picture of us outside that same company building, taken on the day I first got promoted. I looked so young, proud, eager, full of purpose. I touched the photo gently and whispered, "We did it, Harold. We really did it." Tears came then. Not of sadness, not even of victory, but of release. Like 30 years of holding my breath had finally ended. Over the next few days, the story kept unfolding. Every news channel covered it. There were interviews, investigations, even apologies from people who had once dismissed me as the quiet accountant in the corner. But I stayed away from all of it. No interviews, no statements. I just lived my little life. My garden began to bloom again. The bakery down the street started saving me an extra loaf. The world somehow felt warmer. One morning as I was watering my plants, a letter arrived. Plain white envelope, no return address. I opened it carefully. Inside was a short handwritten note. To whoever compiled the audit. You saved more people than you'll ever know. Thank you. No name. No title. Just that. I folded it neatly, placed it in my old ledger book, and smiled. Because that's all I'd ever wanted. For something good to come from the truth. Now, sometimes people ask me if I ever regret what I did. If I ever think maybe it was too harsh, too final. And I tell them no. Because when you spend your life doing the right thing quietly, people mistake your silence for permission. Until one day, you show them what real quiet power looks like. Not revenge, not rage, but the calm after a storm that's finally over. And that's what that morning was for me. Calm. Peace. The stillness after justice had finally been served. That night, I sat by my window again, tea in hand, watching the city lights blink like distant stars. Somewhere, Veronica Hale was probably sitting in an interrogation room, realizing that her empire, built on arrogance and deceit, had been undone by the woman she thought was invisible. And I couldn't help but smile at the irony. She'd always told me I was too small to make a difference. But sometimes, the smallest hands hold the biggest truths. You know, people think the world changes with noise. They believe it takes shouting, breaking, and screaming to make things right. But I've learned something different. Sometimes the loudest change begins in silence. When Veronica threw me out of that building, when she pointed to the door and said I had 10 minutes to leave, I thought my story was ending. But that's the thing about endings. They have a way of leading you exactly where you were meant to go. For weeks after it all happened, I kept expecting to feel angry, or proud, or something big. But the truth is, I mostly felt peace. It's strange how peace doesn't arrive like a thunderclap. It just drifts in one morning. Quiet, steady, like the sun that rises even when you think the night will never end. I started noticing small things again. The way my tea steam curled in the light. The way the radio host always hummed before the news. The way my plants leaned toward the sun, no matter where I moved them. Maybe that's what freedom feels like. Not grand or dramatic. Just soft, patient, steady. A few months later, I got a letter from the company's new director. It was formal at first, full of those polite words people use when they don't quite know what to say. But tucked at the bottom, handwritten in ink, were 7 simple words. You were the voice we should have heard. I sat with that letter for a long time. Not because I needed validation, but because it reminded me that integrity might be quiet, but it echoes. I think about Veronica sometimes. Not often and not with bitterness. Just curiosity. I wonder if she ever realized how many chances she had to choose kindness. See, betrayal doesn't always happen in big moments. It happens in those tiny, easy choices. The ones where compassion takes effort and cruelty feels convenient. He chose convenience. Over and over again. And every one of those choices built her downfall long before my report ever did. People have asked me, Weren't you scared to go against her? And I tell them no, not really. Because when someone's taken everything from you, your dignity, your work, your peace, there's nothing left to fear. That's the quiet kind of courage no one talks about. The courage of standing still when the world tells you to bow. Of speaking truth, not for revenge but for peace. And if there's one thing I've learned in 73 years, it's this. Peace earned through truth will always outlast the power built on lies. Sometimes I walk past that old office building. They changed the logo now, painted the walls a different color, but the bones of it are still the same. And every time I pass by, I think about the people inside, typing away, chasing deadlines, drinking burnt coffee. I hope one of them looks up one day and remembers that kindness and integrity are worth more than any promotion. That treating people right is a choice. One that doesn't cost a thing but changes everything. Last spring, I decided to reopen Harold's old bookstore. It had been closed for years, dust on every shelf, cobwebs in every corner. But there was something healing about bringing it back to life, like turning the last page of a hard chapter and starting a new one, slow and gentle. Sometimes young folks come in, students mostly, and they ask what the store's story is. I smile and tell them, oh, it's been through a storm or two, but it always finds its light again. They think I'm talking about the shop. But between you and me, I'm really talking about myself. One afternoon a woman came in. Older, tired, with the same kind of ache in her eyes that I once carried. She looked around quietly and said, I just needed somewhere calm today. I poured her tea, let her sit by the window, and we talked. Not about details or names, just about how people can be cruel when you expect love the most. When she left, she hugged me and said, you make me believe peace is still possible. And that's when I realized, maybe that's why it all happened. Not for revenge. Not for justice alone. But to remind me that even after being broken, you can become someone else's peace. That night, I stood outside the store, looking up at the sign I'd repainted with my own hands. The old wood creaked a little, the letters uneven, but it was mine. Every imperfection, every scar. The wind carried the faint sound of laughter from a cafe down the street. It reminded me of all the times I thought I'd never laugh again. But I do now. Not the loud, careless laughter of youth, but the kind that comes from knowing you've survived worse and still choose to love the world anyway. When I got home, I sat by the window, the same one where I watched the sunrise on the day justice came. Outside, the sky was streaked with gold, and for the first time in a long time, I whispered a thank you. Not to anyone in particular, just to life, for letting me see both the cruelty and the kindness, the fall and the rise. Because both made me who I am. So if anyone ever tells you that silence means weakness, remember me. Remember the woman who sat quietly while her boss screamed. Who packed her box with trembling hands. Who wrote one report that changed everything. Remember that dignity doesn't need an audience. And truth, real truth, doesn't need to shout. It just waits, patiently, until it's ready to be heard. And when that day comes, when truth finally speaks, it doesn't come with fire or fury. It comes like sunrise after a long, cold night. Steady. And impossible to ignore. If you're listening to this and you're in that place, the one where it hurts and no one believes you, I want you to know, your silence doesn't mean you've lost. It just means you're waiting for the right moment to rise. And when you do, don't shout, don't fight, just shine. Because there's no sound in the world louder than quiet justice finding its way home.